The Discovery, Chapter 14, Hearth's Warming Eve. The ice-cold breeze of Hearth's Warming Eve blew through Canterlot, and the ponies of Equestria celebrated yet another year of family, friendship, and happiness. Canterlot Castle was no exception, and hundreds of ponies crammed into its stone walls, all happy to enjoy the annual Hearth's Warming Eve play. Among these many ponies sat a very happy Midnight Shadow, and an equally happy David Lawson. The mood was tense as the actors prepared for the coming show. In mere minutes, they would perform in front of 1,000 Canterlot nobles, all 4 princesses of Equestria, and the first ever alien to land on equestrian soil. David sat next to none other than Princess Celestia and Luna as the curtains opened and the play began. They sat on the princess's private balcony, overlooking the stage. Twilight sat 2 seats to David's right. Her mother, Twilight Velvet, and her father, Nightlight, sat next to her, along with her brother, Shining Armor, and Princess Cadence. Cadence carried her foal, Flurry Heart in her hooves, as the first actors took the stage. Although there was an empty seat on David's right, Midnight wouldn't be swayed, and took her place sitting on his lap, nuzzling her head against his neck the entire show. She barely even paid attention to the play, as they began the tale of the founding of Equestria, as she was far too busy showering David with affection. David was slightly hesitant to return her affections at first, but after a comforting nod of reassurance from Celestia, he happily nuzzled her back. He rubbed her back with his free hand, while his other twirled her mane around between his fingers. After the first few minutes, the 2 lovebirds made no effort to hide their affections, catching the attention of all 4 princesses and their families from the show. Princess Celestia watched over them with a genuine smile, and gave a friendly wink to David when he eventually tore his eyes from Midnight's for a moment. Princess Luna glanced over at Celestia, and shared a knowing smile with her sister, and they both lightly giggled at their hoofwork. The play continued without a hitch, and before long the intermission finally arrived. Every pony took the time to get out of their seats and stretch their legs and wings. Well, every pony except for David. After Midnight hopped off his lap and went to the restroom, David took a minute to rub his temples. A painful migraine forced its way into his skull sometime after the play started, but for Midnight's sake, he managed to hide the pain for the duration of the first half of the play. David moved his hands to his brow and massaged the pain away as best as he could. He managed to subdue the pain for a moment before Midnight returned. He quickly sat up and welcomed her back with open arms and a bright smile. Midnight hopped back into David's lap again and kissed him happily. After holding the kiss for a moment, she pulled away and smiled back at him.
Miss me?
Midnight asked playfully.
More than you can imagine.
David replied, his voice full of mirth. Midnight nuzzled David's cheek, and he hugged her tightly in return. Before long, the royal sisters and the Sparkle family returned and took their seats. The second half of the play began a moment later, and with it, David's migraine. Eventually, the play came to an end, and the many actors filled the stage to take one last bow before they were met with a massive round of applause. David and Midnight managed to pry themselves apart from each other for a few moments to join in the applause, before every pony began to leave. As the group made their way out of the performance hall and into the princess's private chambers, Twilight made her way over to David as he walked beside Midnight.
Hey, David! What did you think of the play? I think they really got the Wendigos down this time. They were so realistic. What? Oh, yeah, they were super realistic with their, wind and stuff.
David absent-mindedly replied.
What? David, did you even watch the play?
Twilight asked, confusion clear in her voice.
Yes?
David lied, and Twilight sighed.
You didn't even pay attention, did you?
Twilight deadpanned.
Well, I tried. There was just a certain pony who kept distracting me.
David said, nudging Midnight with his leg.
Hey, don't blame me. I can't help it. You're just too cute, big guy.
Midnight replied, bumping her hips against David's leg.
Look who's talking.
David replied, rustling Midnight's mane.
Stop it, you goofball.
Midnight said through a giggle.
Anyways, Sorry, Twy. I guess I was a little distracted.
David said.
Well, maybe if you weren't so busy smooching with your special sun pony, you'd have understood the play.
Twilight said with a pout.
I promise that you can explain it to me in extreme detail later tonight, Twilight.
David said with a slight roll of his eyes. So, just out of curiosity, how did you and Midnight even end up together? Shining Armor chimed in from behind Twilight's.
Well, that's a long story,
David began, while rubbing the back of his neck.
Suffice to say that we both felt the same way, but weren't too sure how to tell each other. At least until the princesses decided to play matchmaker with us.
Midnight added.
As we said before, Midnights, we only gave you a nudge in the right direction. Everything else that happened between you was your own doing.
Celestia said with a smug smile.
Well, regardless of who did what, we're all incredibly happy for the both of you.
Cadence said with a genuine smile.
Thank you, Princess.
Midnight replied with an equally genuine smile. So, you've been here for just over 2 months now, right, David? Shining Armor inquired.
Yeah, the crash was back in fall. Kinda funny when I think about it. Isaac always talked about how much he loved to watch the leaves turn from green to orange and red. I wish he could have seen this place. I wish they all could have.
David said, his tone slowly turning mournful as he spoke.
I'm sure they would have all loved Equestria just as much as you do. And they would have been more than welcome to stay.
Cadence said warmly.
Thanks, Cadence.
David trailed off. As the party reached the royal dining room, David slightly strayed away from the group, much to Midnight's surprise. While every pony else headed into the dining room for dinner, David stopped in the doorway and brought his hand to his head. He felt immense pressure in his head, like a bowling ball was competing with his brain for space in his skull. His brow furrowed in discomfort, and there was a slight grimace on his face.
David? What's wrong?
Midnight asked, as the other ponies sat down for dinner.
I just got this killer headache out of nowhere. I don't know why, but my head is pounding.
David answered, while rubbing his temple.
Do you want me to see if the princesses have some aspirin? Or I think Twilight might have a spell that could help with that.
Midnight offered.
Thanks, Mid, but I think I'll be okay.
David said, though clearly in pain. Midnight's brow furrowed in concern, and she stepped over to David's side to provide whatever support she could. Several of the other ponies present noticed the lack of a human in the room and started walking over to David to see what was wrong. Celestia was the first to approach and voice her concern of the group.
David, are you feeling all right?
She asked.
Yeah, just got a headache. Out of nowhere. Jesus, this hurts.
David said with tightly shut eyes and gritted teeth.
Do you need to sit down?
Celestia asked.
Sister, could you get David a glass of water? Maybe that will help. Of course.
Luna answered as she levitated a full glass of water over to David. David quickly grabbed the glass out of the air and downed the drink as fast as he could, before pressing his forearm against the wall and leaning his head into it. He shut his eyes as tightly as he could, but nothing seemed to stop the throbbing pain in his head. Twilight and her family all shared concerned glances before she came forward and spoke.
David, if you want, I can try a spell to help you with the pain. I have several spells that can deal with a migraine.
Twilight offered.
Yeah, do it.
David managed to say. A bright magenta light poured from Twilight's horn, and an equally bright light wrapped itself around David's head. Several seconds passed as the ponies in the room anticipated a quick pop, and David to shake off the migraine like it never happened. Instead, David screamed out in pain. Twilight immediately dropped the spell and watched in horror as David fell to his knees. His face was contorted in pain, and tears began to leak out of his tightly closed eyes. Midnight's jaw dropped in horror, and she rushed to David's aid. She quickly wrapped her hooves around him and held him close.
What did you do?
Midnight screamed.
I was just casting the spell to help his migraine. I didn't do anything else, I swear.
Twilight managed to say through a shock. All eyes in the room fell to David as he writhed about in Midnight's arms. He was clearly in agony, and from the looks of things, it was only getting worse. "I'll get a doctor," Shining Armor said, as he galloped out of the room.
Here, let's clear some space on the couch for him,
Nightlight ordered. Twilight, Velvet, and Nightlight set about clearing the couch, while the princesses and Twilight stayed with David and Midnight.
We need to do something about the pain,
Celestia stated.
Luna, can you do anything with your magic? I don't want to risk using mine in case something worse happens, like with Twilight.
Twilight visibly tensed at the mention of her name, but it went unnoticed as every pony's attention was directed to Luna.
The best I can do is put him to sleep for the night,
Luna said quickly.
We've got the couch cleared. Bring him over.
Twilight Velvet called out from the other side of the room.
Right, put him under and then we'll move him to the couch,
Celestia commanded.
Are you sure that's safe? What if it makes things worse?
Midnight pleaded.
Midnight, there isn't a better option at the moment. David's clearly in pain. I know you want to protect him, but trust me, we would never harm him. You have my word,
Celestia said, her tone firm. Midnight stared at the princess for a second before her eyes fell down onto David's body as he writhed about in agony. She closed her eyes and sighed.
Okay,
Midnight said, her voice barely above a whisper. Come on, guys, there's nothing to be worried about. He's just doing the worm in a really weird way. Anywho, let's get on to our groovy donators. Top donators are 630, BadassWaffle, Only One Thing, Ceru Orion, IronSky, and Jessie Smith. Matchvic109, Jock TF, Darkside Raiden Narwhals, Black Moon, Our Pastel Skies, Austin Rollins, 2 Hex, Sword Brother Margid, Omicron Library, Rinslife Nende 52, Will, Chris, Twinkie, Brysol, Shadow Moon, Luigi 88, Chancer Crust, Big Smoke 369, Bobcat GGF, Murder Princess, and many more sweet people. Thank you all so much for watching this video and live life to the fullest.